Let's bring in Heather McGhee, the director of the DC office of DEMOS and nonpartisan public policy group. Great, thanks for your time tonight, Heather.
Thank you, Keith.
Purely from a policy perspective, what should Democrats be doing about the expiration of the Bush tax cuts on the 31st of December?
Well, that depends on what kind of Democrat you are. As you just showed in your segment there are a few different types of Democrats. But if you're the type of Democrat who really cares about having a prosperous American economy with a strong middle class at the center of it, then of course you know that the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy were a bad idea in 2001 and 2003, and they're an even worse idea in 2010 when we've got 1 in 10 Americans out of a job, and actually the lowest federal revenue as a share of our GDP than we've had in 50 years.
The deficit hawk Rand Paul made this extraordinary statement today that he has no way to pay for these tax cuts. So what, he says, essentially. What happens to economic growth and to job creation if they were to add $3+ trillion to the deficit to make sure the top 2% get their lowered taxes?
This has really been one of the most disappointing parts of this political season, just the height of hypocrisy around the deficit and jobs. We've got an extraordinary situation in communities all across this country where people are out of work, where the jobs have simply disappeared. And because of this phony deficit hawk nonsense that's going on in Washington, there isn't even the political will to do what needs to be done to actually put people back to work. Direct spending on jobs, direct job creation is off the table because of the deficit. And yet, as soon as we start talking about tax cuts for the rich, so many of those deficit hawks are actually now twiddling their thumbs and trying to find a way to backpedal out of their deficit fear-mongering.
You mentioned the different kinds of Democrats. How would you respond to this Congressman Matheson in Utah saying that any tax cut will hurt his district?
You know, I'm really glad that you actually did the homework for the congressman and finding out what the people in his district actually earn. Because if you'd done a little more homework, you would know that actually only about 2% of the American small business owners actually pay the tax rate that we're talking about here. So this Republican talking point that Matheson and a lot of the Republicans have been saying about it's actually small business owners who are going to pay these top rates, and therefore we can't raise them or we'll hurt the economy, is simply nonsense. They also should know that tax cuts for the rich are actually the least effective way to stimulate the economy. Less effective by about 80% than infrastructure spending, than state aid to keep teachers and firefighters in their jobs, and then unemployment, and then of course again direct job creation, which I have to keep harping on because it's just off of the table right now in Washington, and it's ridiculous when we have the community suffering the way that they are.
To finish your thought, obviously the money that is given back to the rich they put in their wallets or more likely in their bank accounts. But one other point that we don't often talk enough about, I think, we're only talking about tax rates on income that you make at your job, and most of the wealthy already pay a lower rate that's not based on their income, but it's based on where their money comes from. Correct? And can you expand on that a little?
Yeah, this is actually, Keith, one of the biggest conservative economic policy victories of our time. They got it to a situation in which in America today, wealth is taxed at a lower rate than work. So if I'm a middle-class American who goes to work and depends on a paycheck, the tax rate that's important to me is the income tax rate. If I'm middle class, I have a tax rate of about 25%. But if I'm a CEO or someone who's inherited a lot of wealth, whose real income depends on capital gains, stock dividends, basically what happens on Wall Street and what my investment advisor says and how well my stocks do, because of the Bush tax code, 15% as opposed to 25% is the rate that is paid on capital gains and dividends. Wealth is taxed less than work in America. I mean, we champion workers in America. We say that we respect work, but obviously that's not the case with the Bush tax code.
Yep, and we're providing disincentives for rich people to go out and get a job. Heather McGhee, Washington Director of the Public Policy Research Organization DEMOS. Great, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you, Keith.